Jai Jai Shri Caitanya, Jai Nityananda, Jai Advaita Chandra, Jai Gaura Bhakta-vrinda. Tanya Jai Nityananda, Jai Advaita Chandra, Jai Gaura Bhakta-vrinda. Jai Jai Shri Caitanya, Jai Nityananda, Jai Advaita Chandra, Gaura Bhakta-vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I'm reading from the Sri Caitanya Charitamrita, Adi Lila, Chapter 7, Lord Chaitanya in 5 features. Agat yeka gatim natva, hinartadika sadhakam. Sri Caitanyam likyatesya prema bhakti vadanyata. Agati means the most fallen. Ek, the only one. Gatim, destination. Natva, after offering obeisances. Hina, inferior. Artha, interest. Adhika, greater than that. Sadhakam, who can render. Sri Caitanyam, unto Lord Sri Caitanya. Likhite is being written. Asya, of the Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, prema, love, bhakti, devotional service, vadanyata, magnanimity. Let me first offer my respectful obeisances unto Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is the ultimate goal of life for one bereft of all possessions in this material world, and is the only meaning for one advancing in spiritual life. Thus let me write about his magnanimous contribution of devotional service and love of God. Purport: a person in the conditioned stage of material existence is in an atmosphere of helplessness, but the conditioned soul, under the illusion of Maya, or the external energy, thinks that he is completely protected by his country, society, friendship, and love, not knowing that at the time of death, none of these can save him. The laws of material nature are so strong that none of our material possessions can save us from the cruel hands of death. In the Bhagavad Gita 13.9, it is stated, Janma mrityu jara vyadhi dukkha doshana darshanam. One who is actually advancing must always consider the 4 principles of miserable life, namely birth, death, old age, and disease. One cannot be saved from all these miseries unless he takes shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is therefore the only shelter for all conditioned souls. An intelligent person, therefore, does not put his faith in any material possessions, but completely takes shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord. Such a person is called a Kṛṣṇa, or one who does not possess anything in this material world. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is also known as a Kṛṣṇa Gochara, for he can be achieved by a person who does not put his faith in material possessions. Therefore, for the fully surrendered soul who has no material possessions on which to depend, Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the only shelter. Everyone depends on dharma, religiosity, artha, economic development, kama, sense gratification, and ultimately moksha, salvation. But Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, due to his magnanimous character, can give more than salvation. Therefore, in this verse, the words hinardadika sadhakam indicate that although, by material estimation, salvation is of a quality superior to the inferior interests of religiosity, economic development, and sense gratification, above salvation there is the position of devotional service and transcendental love for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the bestower of this great benediction. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, Prema pum arto mahan. Love of Godhead is the ultimate benediction for all human beings. Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, the author of Sri Caitanya Charitamrita, therefore first offers his respectful obeisances unto Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu before describing his magnanimity in bestowing love of Godhead. All good? Yes. Okay. Jaya Jaya Mahaprabhu, Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Tahara Charanashrita She Bada Dhana. Let me offer my respectful obeisances to the Supreme Lord, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. One who has taken shelter of his lotus feet is the most glorified person. Purport. Prabhu means master. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the supreme master of all masters. Therefore he is called Mahaprabhu. Any person who takes shelter of Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is most glorified because of the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He is able to get promotion to the platform of loving service to the Lord, which is transcendental salvation. What do you guys do? I'm working for trying to get a promotion. Text number 3. In the beginning, I have discussed the truth about the spiritual master. Now I shall try to explain the Panchatattva. The first chapter of Caitanya Caritamrita Adi Lila, in the first chapter, the author, Sri Kṛṣṇa Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, has described the initiator spiritual master and the instructor spiritual master in the verse beginning with the words Vande Gurun Isha Bhaktan, Isham Isha Avatarakan. In that verse, there are 6 transcendental subject matters of which the truth regarding the spiritual master has already been described. Now the author will describe the other 5 tattvas, namely Isha Tattva, Supreme Lord, his expansion tattva, his incarnation tattva, his energy tattva, and his devotee tattva. These 5 tattvas incarnate with Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and thus the Lord executes his Sankirtan movement with great pleasure. Purport. In Srimad Bhagavatam 11.532, there is the following statement regarding Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Krishna Varnam Tosha Krishnam Sangopangashtra Parshadam Jagnai Sankirtana Prayar Yajantihi Sumedasa. In the age of Kali, people who are endowed with sufficient intelligence will worship the Lord, who is accompanied by his associates by performance of the Sankirtan Yajna. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is always accompanied by his plenary expansion, Sri Nityananda Prabhu, his incarnation, Sri Advaita Prabhu, his internal potency, Sri Gadadhar Prabhu, and his marginal potency, Srivas Prabhu. He is in the midst of them as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One should know that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is always accompanied by these other tattvas. Therefore, our obeisances to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu are complete when we say Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advaita, Gadadhara, Srivasadi, Gaura Bhaktavrinda. As preachers of the Krishna consciousness movement, we first offer obeisances to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu by chanting this Panchatattva mantra. Then we say Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. There are 10 offenses in the chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, but these are not considered in the chanting of the Panchatattva mantra, namely Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is known as Mahavadhanaya Avatar, the most magnanimous incarnation, for he does not consider the offenses of the fallen souls. Thus, to derive the full benefit of chanting the Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, we must first take shelter of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Learn the Panchatattva Maha Mantra, and then chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. That will be very effective. Taking advantage of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, many unscrupulous devotees manufacture a Maha Mantra of their own. Sometimes they sing Bhaja Nitai Gaura Radhe Sham Hare Krishna Hare Ram, or Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Hare Krishna Hare Rama Shri Radhe Govinda. Actually, however, one should chant the names of the full Panchatattva, Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda, And then the 16 words, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. But these unscrupulous, less intelligent men confuse the entire process. Of course, since they are also devotees, they can express their feelings in that way, but the method prescribed by Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu's pure devotees is to first chant the full Panchatattva mantra and then chant the Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Text 5. Spiritually, there are no differences between these 5 tattvas, for on the transcendental platform, everything is absolute. Yet there are also varieties in the spiritual world, and in order to taste these spiritual varieties, one should distinguish between them. Purport. In his Anubhashya commentary, Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur describes the Panchatattva as follows. The Supreme Energetic, the Personality of Godhead, manifesting in order to enjoy 5 kinds of pastimes, appears as the members of the Panchatattva. Actually, there is no difference between them because they are situated on the absolute platform, but they manifest different spiritual varieties as a challenge to the impersonalists to taste different kinds of spiritual humors, rasas. In the Vedas it is said, Parasa Shaktir Vivadaiva Shruyate, that the varieties of energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are differently known. From this statement of the Vedas, one can understand that there are eternal varieties of humors or tastes in the spiritual world. Shri Gauranga, Shri Nityananda, Shri Advaita, Shri Gadadhar, and Srivas Thakur are all on the same platform, but in spiritually distinguishing between them, one should understand that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the form of a devotee. Nityananda Prabhu appears in the form of a devotee's spiritual master. Advaita Prabhu is the form of a bhakta, devotee incarnation. Gadadhar Prabhu is the energy of a bhakta, and Srivas Thakur is a pure devotee. Thus, there are spiritual distinctions between them. The Bhakta Rupa, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Bhakta Swarupa, Sri Nityananda Prabhu, and the Bhakta Avatar, Sri Advaita Prabhu, are described as the Supreme Personality of God Himself, His immediate manifestation, and His plenary expansion, and they all belong to the Vishnu category. Although the spiritual and marginal energies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are non-different from the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vishnu, they are predominated subjects, whereas Lord Vishnu is the predominator. As such, although they are on the same platform, they have appeared differently in order to facilitate tasting of transcendental mellows. Actually, however, there's no possibility of one being different from the other. For the worshipper and the worshipable cannot be separated at any stage. On the absolute platform, one cannot understand one without the other. Any thoughts so far? Yes?
I noticed that Prabhupada included the full Mahamantra 4 times in one purport.
Yeah. You can always recommend that verse. Somebody who chant half a round. Any other comments?
I was curious to know this discussion about the spiritual ecstasies appearing in someone who's even chanting those.
Yeah.
What's going on? From chanting Nitai Gaur, is that the idea? They become free from offenses, and so they experience some type of ecstasy, but it may not be
Yeah.
a perfectional stage.
Yeah. Amazing, right? I mean, it stands to reason. Because even Sanketyam Pariyasam Va Shobham Helanameva Va Vaikuntha Nama Grahanam Asheshaga Haram Vidu. The Vidus, the learned persons, know that people chant the names in various ways, have there's an effect. But especially names of, Prabhupada mentions it elsewhere, even people who chant the names of Nityananda just incidentally or in the course of making up their sahaja stuff, they get some ecstasy. And when we were in Navadvip on our yatra one year, and these 5 Mayavadi sannyasis came in to watch us, and they were stone-faced for the whole time. Especially we were chanting Hare Krishna, there's no reaction. But at the end I sang Doyonitai Caitanya Bolin, Nachayar Marman, and they went nuts. They started jumping up and down and dancing and everything like that. And I was just amazed to see how the names of Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda are so potent. Any other things so far? Yes?
When Prabhupada describes the 5 features, I tried to write it down as you were saying it. The third one was Bhakta, devotee incarnation. The fourth was energy of an incarnation. Can you provide a little more, maybe language to help us remember what these exactly mean?
Well, just think of the Leela. When Lord Chaitanya comes, when Lord Nityananda comes to Navadvip, before he comes, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has some premonitions and dreams, and he tells everyone about it, how I saw this very powerful personality come in a chariot with a palm tree insignia on a flag, and it was Lord Nityananda was on his way. But when he came there, he didn't reveal himself. He stayed in the house of Chandanacharya, where everybody else hides. And Lord Chaitanya said, oh, this very powerful personality is here. You should go find him. And Advaita and one other devotee went out looking. They searched everywhere, couldn't find him. But then Mahaprabhu took him right to the house. And there he wanted to perform Guru Puja, because Nityananda, as you mentioned there, he's the incarnation of the spiritual master. And he tried to put the garland on him, but Lord Nityananda put it on Lord Chaitanya. And then, of course, Advaitacharya, he's the incarnation of a devotee. So we get that because he's Mahavishnu. Mahavishnu Jagat Karta Maya Yasajat Yada Dasyavataram Evayam Advaitacharya Ishvara. He's Mahavishnu, and he incarnates just to call Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It's one of the reasons that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu comes to the world, as mentioned in the 2nd chapter. It's because of the loud cries of Advaitacharya, who has so much compassion for living beings because he's part of the Srishti Leela, and he could see how everyone's being bewildered by Maya. So he's called the incarnation of a devotee. And then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is famous for being the example of a devotee. Srivas Thakur is called a pure devotee because he's a jiva, but he's a pure devotee. And then you have Gadadhar, who's the energy of the Lord, just like Srimati Radharani is the energy of Krishna. Radha Krishna Pranaya Vikritir Ladini Shakti Rasmad. And that's how their leelas are. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, you have Bhaktivinoda Thakur worshipping Gaur Gadadhar, because he was showing how Gadadhar is the energy and Lord Chaitanya is the energetic. And Nityananda acted as the guru.
Thank you.
Any other thing? Can you hear me better now?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Hare Krishna. May I read a little more?
Yes.
Let me offer respectful obeisance unto Lord Sri Krishna, who has manifested himself in 5 as a devotee, expansion of a devotee, incarnation of a devotee, pure devotee, and devotional energy. Sri Nityananda Prabhu is the immediate expansion of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu as his brother. He is the personified spiritual bliss of Sakchidananda Vigraha. His body is transcendental and full of ecstasy and devotional service. Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu is therefore called Bhakta Rupa, the form of a devotee. And Sri Nityananda Prabhu is called Bhakta Swarupa, the expansion of a devotee. Sri Advaita Prabhu, the incarnation of a devotee, is Vishnu Tattva and belongs to the same category. There are also different types of bhaktas, or devotees, on the platforms of neutrality, servitude, friendship, parenthood, and conjugal love. Devotees like Sri Damodar, Sri Gadadhar, and Sri Ramananda are different energies. This confirms... Sorry, got an ant crawling on my eye. Must have been hiding somewhere. Okay, little fella. I wonder where he thinks he is. He'll report back to the crew. Let's see. His body is transcendental and full of ecstasy and devotional service. Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu is therefore called Bhakta Rupa, the form of a devotee, and Sri Nityananda Prabhu is called Bhakta Swarupa, the expansion of a devotee. Sri Advaita Prabhu, the incarnation of a devotee, is Vishnu Tattva and belongs to the same category. There are also different types of bhaktas, or devotees, on the platforms of neutrality, servitude, friendship, parenthood, and conjugal love. Devotees like Sri Damodar, Sri Gadadhar, and Sri Ramananda are different energies. This confirms the Vedic sutra Parasha Shaktir Vivadaiva Shuyate. All these bhakta subjects taken together constitute Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, who is Krishna himself. You'll only hear that here. Because most people have an amorphous idea of God. They don't have much idea of what's at all. They have some sentiment, but no science for it, about rasa. Some idea of God being omniscient, all-powerful, but not much idea about the relationship he has, or the varieties within the Supreme. Like Vedanti tat vavidas tatvam yajganam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti shabdite. That Advaya Gyan Tattva, he's one thing, everything's God, but at the same time, there's varieties within the oneness. And even why there'd be a variety in the first place. Right? Yes. Eko Bahu Sham, for his own enjoyment, he expands himself into many, unlimited expansions. Krishna, the reservoir of all pleasure, is the Supreme Personality of God in himself, the Supreme Controller. No one is greater than or equal to Sri Krishna, yet he appears as the son of Maharaj Nanda. In this verse, Kaviraj Goswami gives an accurate description of Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, by stating that although no one is equal to or greater than him, and he is the reservoir of all spiritual pleasure, he nevertheless appears as the son of Maharaj Nanda and Yashodamayi. Rasadi Vilasi, Vrajalalana Nagara, Arjata Shab Deko Tar Parikara. Rasadi Vilasi. Do you like that? Rasadi Vilasi. Lord Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the supreme enjoyer in the rasa dance. Rasa Vilasi. He is a teacher, he's the leader of the damsels of Vraja, and all others are simply his associates. The word rasa vilasi, the enjoyer of the rasa dance, is very important. The rasa dance can be enjoyed only by Sri Krishna because he is the supreme leader and chief of the damsels of Vrindavan. All others are his devotees and associates. Although no one can compare with Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there are many unscrupulous rascals who imitate the rasa dance of Sri Krishna. They are Mayavadis, and people should be wary of them. The rasa dance can be performed only by Sri Krishna and no one else. The self-same Lord Krishna advented himself as Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu with all his eternal associates, who are also equally glorious. Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, who is the Supreme Controller, the one Supreme Personality of Godhead, has ecstatically become a devotee, yet his body is transcendental and not materially tinged. Purport: there are different tattvas or truths, including Isha tattva, Jiva tattva, and Shakti tattva. Isha tattva refers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vishnu, who is the Supreme Living Force. In the Karta Upanishad, it is said, Nityo Nityanam, Chaitanash Chaitananam. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the Supreme Eternal and the Supreme Living Force. The living entities are also eternal and are also living forces, but they are very minute in quantity. Whereas the Supreme Lord is the Supreme Living Force and the Supreme Eternal. The Supreme Eternal never accepts a body of a temporary material nature, whereas the living entities who are part and parcel of the Supreme Eternal are prone to do so. Thus, according to the Vedic mantras, the Supreme Lord is the Supreme Master of innumerable living entities. The Mayavadi philosophers, however, try to equate the minute living entities with the Supreme Living Entity. Because they recognize no distinctions between them, their philosophy is called Advaitavada, or monism. Factually, however, there is a distinction. This verse is especially meant to impart to the Mayavadi philosopher the understanding that the Supreme Personality of God is the Supreme Controller. The Supreme Controller, the Personality of God, is Krishna himself, but as a transcendental pastime, he has accepted the form of a devotee, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita, when the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna comes on to this planet exactly like a human being, some rascals consider him to be one of the ordinary humans. One who thinks in that mistaken way is described as mudha, or foolish. Therefore, one should not foolishly consider Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to be an ordinary human being. He has accepted the ecstasy of a devotee, but he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Since the time of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, there have been many imitation incarnations of Krishna who could not understand that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Krishna himself and not an ordinary human being. Less intelligent men create their own gods by advertising a human being as God. This is their mistake. Therefore, hear the words Tar Shuddha Kalevara warn that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's body is not material but purely spiritual. One should not therefore accept Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as an ordinary devotee, although he has assumed the form of a devotee. Yet one must certainly know that although Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because he accepted the ecstasy of a devotee, one should not misunderstand his pastimes and place him in exactly the same position as Krishna. It is for this reason only that when Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was addressed as Krishna or Vishnu, he blocked his ears, not wanting to hear himself addressed as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. There is a class of devotees called Gauranga Nagari who stage plays of Krishna's pastimes using a vigraha or a form of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. This is a mistake that is technically called rasa bhasa. While Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is trying to enjoy as a devotee, one should not disturb him by addressing him as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The transcendental mellow of conjugal love of Krishna is so wonderful that Krishna himself accepts the form of a devotee to relish and taste it fully. It's an important verse. Krishna madhur yer ak adbhuta subhava apana asvadite Krishna kari bhakta bhava. Krishna madhur yer. The supreme pleasure potency of Krishna, ak, is one, adbhuta, wonderful, subhava, nature, apana, himself, asvadite, to taste, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, kare, does, bhakta-bhava, accept the form of a devotee. The transcendental mellow of conjugal love of Krishna is so wonderful that Krishna himself accepts the form of a devotee to relish and taste it fully. Although Krishna is the reservoir of all pleasure, he has a special intention to taste himself by accepting the form of a devotee. It is to be concluded that although Lord Caitanya is present in the form of a devotee, he is Krishna himself. Therefore, Vaishnavas sing, Shri Krishna Caitanya, Radha Krishna Nahayanya. Radha and Krishna combined together are Shri Krishna Caitanya Mahaprabhu. And as Shri Swarup Damodar Goswami has said, Chaitanyakyam Prakatamaduna Tadvayam Chaikyam Aptam. Radha and Krishna assumed oneness in the form of Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. That's why there's nobody better than Lord Chaitanya. For this reason, Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Supreme Teacher, accepts the form of a devotee and accepts Lord Nityananda as his elder brother. Sri Advaita Acharya is Lord Chaitanya's incarnation as a devotee. Therefore, these three tattvas, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Nityananda Prabhu, and Advaita Gosai, are the predominators or masters. Gosai means Goswami. A person who has full control over the senses and mind is called a Goswami or Gosai. One who does not have such control is called Godas, or a servant of the senses, and cannot become a spiritual master. A spiritual master who actually has control over the mind and senses is called Goswami. Although the Goswami title has become a hereditary designation for unscrupulous men, actually the title Gosai or Goswami began from Sri Rupa Goswami, who presented himself as an ordinary grihastha and minister in government service, but became a Goswami when he was actually elevated by the instruction of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Therefore, Goswami is not a hereditary title, but refers to one's qualifications. When one is highly elevated in spiritual advancement, regardless of where from he comes, he may be called Goswami. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Sri Nityananda Prabhu, and Sri Advaita Gosai Prabhu are natural Goswamis because they belong to the Vishnu Tattva category. As such, all of them are Prabhus, predominators or masters, and they are sometimes called Chaitanya Gosai, Nityananda Gosai, Nityananda Gosai, and Advaita Gosai. Unfortunately, their so-called descendants who do not have qualifications of Goswamis have accepted this title as a hereditary designation or a professional degree. That is not in accord with the Shastric injunctions. One of them is Mahaprabhu and the other two are Prabhus. These two Prabhus serve the lotus feet of Mahaprabhu. Would you like to hear the purport?
Yes.
Okay. Although Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Sri Nityananda Prabhu, and Sri Advaita Prabhu all belong to the same Vishnu category, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is nevertheless accepted as the Supreme, and the other two Prabhus engage in his transcendental loving service to teach ordinary living entities that every one of us is subordinate to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. In another place in the Caitanya Caritamrita, it is said, Akale Ishar Krishna ar sabrita. The only Supreme Master is Krishna, and all others, both Vishnu Tattva and Jiva Tattva, engage in the service of the Lord. Both the Vishnu Tattva, as Nityananda Prabhu and Advaita, and the Jiva Tattva, Sri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda, engage in the service of the Lord. But one must distinguish between the Vishnu Tattva servitors and the Jiva Tattva servitors. The Jiva Tattva servitor, the spiritual master, is actually the servitor of God. As explained in previous verses, in this absolute world there are no such differences. Yet one must observe these differences in order to distinguish the Supreme from his subordinates. Etin tato sarvaradya kari mani chaturta je bhakta tato aradhaka jani. The three predominators, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Nityananda Prabhu, and Advaita Prabhu, are worshipable by all living entities, And the fourth principle, Sri Gadadhar Prabhu, is to be understood as their worshipper. Purport: in his Anubhashya, Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, describing the truth about the Panchatattva, explains that we should understand that Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the supreme predominator and that Nityananda Prabhu and Advaita Prabhu are his subordinates, but are also predominators. Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the Supreme Lord, and Nityananda Prabhu and Advaita Prabhu are manifestations of the Supreme Lord. All of them are Vishnu Tattva, the Supreme, and are therefore worshipable by the living entities. Although the other two tattvas within the category Panchatattva, namely Shakti Tattva and Jiva Tattva, represented by Gadadhar and Srivas, are worshippers of the Supreme Lord, they are in the same category because they eternally engage in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. There are innumerable pure devotees of the Lord headed by Srivas Thakur, who are known as unalloyed devotees. The devotees headed by Gadadhar Pandit are to be considered incarnations of the internal potency of the Lord. They are confidential devotees engaged in the service of the Lord. In connection with verses 16 and 17, Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur explains in his Anubhashya, there are specific symptoms by which the internal devotees and the unalloyed or pure devotees are to be known. All unalloyed devotees are Shakti Tattvas, or potencies of the Lord. Some of them are situated in conjugal love and others in parental affection, fraternity, and servitude. Certainly all of them are devotees, but by making a comparative study, it is found that the devotees or potencies who are engaged in conjugal love are better situated than the others. Thus, devotees who are in a relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead in conjugal love are considered to be the most confidential devotees of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Those who engage in the service of Lord Nityananda Prabhu and Lord Advaita Prabhu generally have relationships of parental love, fraternity, servitude, and neutrality. When such devotees develop great attachment for Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they too become situated within the intimate circle of devotees in conjugal love. This gradual development of devotional service is described by Sri Narottam Das Thakur. Gauranga bhalite habe pulaka sharir, hari hari bhalite nayane bhave nir. Ar kabe nitai chan karuna karabe, sang sharavasana mora kabe tucha habe. Vishaya chadiya kabe shuddha habe man, kabe hama heba Shri Vrindavan. Rupa Raghunatha Pare Haibe Akuti, Kabe Hama Bujabha Shri Jugala Piriti. When will there be eruptions on my body as soon as I chant the name of Lord Chaitanya? And when will there be incessant torrents of tears as soon as I chant the holy names Hare Krishna? When will Lord Nityananda be merciful toward me and free me from all desires for material enjoyment? When will my mind be completely freed from all contamination of desires for material pleasure? Only at that time will it be possible for me to understand Vrindavan. Only if I become attached to the instructions given by the six Goswamis, headed by Rupa Goswami and Raghunath Das Goswami, will it be possible for me to understand the conjugal love of Radha and Krishna. By attachment to the devotional service of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, one immediately comes to the ecstatic position. When he develops his love for Nityananda Prabhu, he is freed from all attachment to the material world. And at that time, he becomes eligible to understand the Lord's pastimes in Vrindavan. In that condition, when one develops his love for the six Goswamis, he can understand the conjugal love between Radha and Krishna. These are different stages of a pure devotee's promotion to conjugal love in the service of Radha and Krishna in an intimate relationship with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Keep going? Any points? Yeah.
So, Maharaj, so in this purport it is said that there are different devotees who are in the mode of parental and filial affection, and they worship Lord Nityananda and Advaita Acharya. But as they progress more, they develop affection for Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and then they enter into conjugal love. Is this understanding correct?
Yeah, he said they enter into the circle of the devotees in conjugal love.
Yeah,
But before you get too technical and try to understand a principle that's not so accessible by just an intellectual process, the pinnacle of everything is Radha and Krishna. And when I say a pinnacle, or I'll say that for all devotees, they're the cynosure. That means they're the center and the object of their love and vision. And everything and all rasas are orchestrated in such a way as to glorify the center of Radha and Krishna. So understanding the harmony of the spiritual world, and harmony used in the context of an orchestra means, yes, there are various instruments, but they all work together for one common objective, which is to make beautiful music. And everyone works together similarly, not that they're working, so to speak, but they serve naturally in a particular relationship, and it all contributes to the ultimate glorification of the supreme Madhurya Ras. You find in Vrindavan and Krishna's pastimes when the plants, the creepers, the water, and various devotees, they're perfectly situated in their own rasa, but then they're also glorifying the ultimate sender, which is the loving affairs between Radha and Krishna. So the ideas here about coming up to a certain level are also mentioned in another context, but in the opposite way, in the Nectar of Devotion. Prabhupada talks about offenses, how somebody on a particular level, if they commit Vaishnava aparadha, depending on how severe the offense is, they can also be demoted as well. So those are comparative thoughts. But we find that there's also a sense of people's sthai bhav that they have throughout Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes. They come to them very naturally. And even examples are there of devotees who have a specific taste for worshipping Krishna, even in the form of Ramachandra, like Rupa and Sanatan's brother, cousin, nephew, Anupam, brother. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Kaviraj Goswami includes that deliberately, that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they told him chant the Krishna mantra, surrender to Krishna, but then he came back the next day, said, I can't do it. And Mahaprabhu appreciated that, and it's there as a statement for his particular taste.
From the purport it seems like Prabhupada is referring to different stages. That's why.
Well, he is, and that's why I brought up a parallel understanding from the Nectar of Devotion. But I started by saying, I'll just say that although it's mentioned there, it's not that we have to adjust our sadhana in a certain way. And it's not something Prabhupada overly emphasized. In fact, he de-emphasized it in the idea that, no, you should climb for Madhurya Ras. That's why I'm trying to be cautious in talking about it, because the subject matter can motivate someone in a misunderstanding that, okay, since you can be promoted, then I should try for that promotion. Whereas the most predominant explanation or method that Prabhupada talks about is by hearing and chanting Tan Nama Rupa Charitari Sukirtananu Smrityo Karmena Rasana Manasi Niyoja Tishtam Vrajeta Nanuragi Jananugami, until one develops a natural attraction. And it's not that somebody who develops a natural attraction for a particular devotee in Vrindavan in the Sakya Ras then should be berated or should reconsider and say, no, you should be elevated, because there's a simultaneous way in which when one does become, who's Vasana more, he's describing in that bhaja, to become free from all motives and desires of the material world. There's an adhikari there for tasting the different rasas exemplified by the devotees in Vrindavan. It comes quite naturally of its own accord, but as Rupa Goswami describes it in the Bhakti Samrita Sindhu, there's an invitation from Kṛṣṇa to come to serve him in a particular way, but the devotee experiences that as his own intelligence prompting him to do that, as it's happening simultaneously. So I'm just trying to say, if you take this and you make it more linear, then it becomes a confusing aspect for many people of how to approach sadhana. Do you see what I'm saying? It's kind of a third rail, like how the devotee comes to the material world in the first place, that requires some chit samadhi to understand. But
I appreciate. We have to focus on getting free from the material attachments more, rather than focusing on this upgradation in terms of our rasa towards Krishna.
And also that there, it's presented in both ways, that through purification, one's natural appreciating capacity, Prabhupada writes in the Adi Lila, chapter 4, text 34, in the second to the last paragraph, he's talking about how that natural appreciating capacity awakens. And he says in it, for a specific way to worship Krishna, it awakens. And the way Prabhupada uses Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhya Kabunai Shravanadi Shuddha Chitte Karu Udoi, just following Prabhupada's lead on that, he indicates it's there, it's dormant, it awakens in a particular way. So if we're aware that the sadhana is Trinadapi Sunichena, and hearing and serving, and as Jai Vaitamaraj was giving in his class, adherence in loyalty to the Guru Parampara, then there's a way in which all these things are revealed. And it's not to say not to discuss them, but I'm just saying that they're presented in both ways, so then you try to figure out what's your sadhana for that. And if it becomes, I have to reposition myself now, without the adhikari to do so, without it naturally awakening that adhikari, coming to adhikari, and then there being a natural appreciation for a specific rasa, then there could be some mistake, as Prabhupada pointed out, to those who read similar things in the Caitanya Charitamrita and then said, okay, let's set up a camp and make sure that that's all we talk about. Because I want to promote myself from here to here. But ultimately, Krishna is the one who promotes us. Lord Chaitanya promotes us. You were going to say?
I was trying to find the reference, but I'm having difficulty tracking it down. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur in this book, Prakata Rasa, yeah, I just found it. One should not climb a tree and grab the fruits and pull them off by force.
Hey, that's from the ripe fruit philosophy.
Rupanugas never climbed the systematic path of bhakti. So the point that's being made is that it's not that you just go and pull yourself into any particular rasa. It's a revelation which comes through surrender and service to the mission of the spiritual master in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And Prabhupada mentions that in the beginning of that purport. By worshipping Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, one gradually becomes inclined towards the conjugal rasa. But what that means isn't necessarily being engaged in the conjugal rasa, as you're saying. It's
within the circle. Everything going around, and your appreciation for it grows.
Yeah.
There may be a perspective in which, as you enter into the Sangha, you may not appreciate. And, I mean, who's better anyway? The one in the rasa or the one appreciating it? It's almost like as the ontology of the Chaitanya Caritamrita points out, who's better, the devotee or Krishna? And it's kind of like, yeah, the devotee. It's Radharani who's the best. And even Krishna admits to it tacitly, because he's saying, like, well, she's getting more than I am. So those who are in other, their sthai bhav is in another rasa, but then they're able to appreciate the Madhurya rasa. I mean, who would be in a particular rasa and not appreciate the Madhurya rasa? Unless you're in a different region of the spiritual world or something where there isn't. Well, there even in with Narayan and Lakshmi, as we were discovering in South India, there's some sense of that exchange, but it's very different from the unceremonious love of Vrindavan. Anything more? Yeah.
We were reading how Mahaprabhu was always rejecting the claims of others that he is God, he would cover his ears and all that. But then also we see other times where he would accept devotees saying that, like during Mahaprakash Leela and other times, to assert his Godhead. So how do you understand that?
Well, that was at a transitional time, the Mahaprakash. And it was the first time he revealed to everyone who he actually was. Much to the delight of his devotees, because they, first of all, they used to pray and talk amongst themselves when Nimai Pandit was a lad and going around trashing everybody because he was so smart. They'd say, God, if he could become a devotee. And then when he transformed, after going to Gaya, he came back, everyone was amazed that he had become a devotee. But nobody knew clearly that he was the Supreme Personality of Godhead until he almost kicked down Srivas Thakur's door. He said, I am he, I am he. And Srivas, if you see his reaction, he was there worshiping Lord Nrsingadev, and they all wanted Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to come out, or there was some suppression of their understanding of him, but there was that deep sense of his greatness. And so when he came out to all the devotees that he was Supreme Personality of Godhead, he was demonstrative and sat down on the throne of Vishnu inside Srivas Thakur's house. And for that time, he revealed to everybody. And of course, Nityananda Prabhu also pushed the envelope. No, I'm going to use that. It's too cliche. He pushed Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as the Supreme Personality of Godhead because he's the guru. And although Chaitanya Mahaprabhu told everyone to go door to door and tell everyone about Krishna, Bolo Krishna, Bhadra Krishna, Kota Krishna Shikha, when they went out, he said, just teach him Gauranga. Because he is Krishna. So there's this unfoldment of his natural position, or his real position as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, to his intimate devotees, so they could worship him very deeply. And then you find in many of his pastimes, for instance, with the Brahmana who came to the house of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu when he was a little baby, and he was cooking for himself, and then little Nimai kept stealing the offering and everything. Several times it happened until he revealed that he was the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But he said, don't tell anybody. Don't reveal to anybody else. Partly, it's explained by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, his commentary in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, where he talks about how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came as a devotee because in Kali Yuga, people become envious of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and they try to imitate. So he tried to suppress that. But he did reveal it in some places. It's not absolute that he didn't reveal it everywhere, as you've pointed out. But it was very strategic how he revealed himself. His pure devotees could exalt him. And besides, he couldn't keep it from them anyway. You know, the pastime of Ramananda Samvad. At the end, Chaitanya, he sees, wait a minute, I'm seeing something really unusual. You're Radha and Krishna. Otherwise, how would we know if he didn't reveal it to his devotees? But in general, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said, he kept it that he's a devotee. And this is an interesting topic also that Bhaktivinoda Thakur goes into. You remember when Lokaram Prabhu gave that presentation? No, maybe none of you were there. Yeah.
I remember it.
Yeah, he made a slideshow about it. I talked about it in Houston when we were there for the Temple President's meeting, but he mentions how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, anyone who appreciates Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gets so much benefit. So he said there's some classes of people who accept him just as a saint, so that'll work. You'll still get benefit. He said he's a historical great personality, a philanthropist or something. And it's like, yep, that too. And then, okay, he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as the devotees know. I mean, even Krishna says, I'm the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and then nobody believes him if they're atheistics. Avajananti mam muda manusham tanamashrita parambhavam vajanato amabhuta maheshwaram. People don't, even he's there showing the universal form to Arjuna and declaring himself the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and people are in Maya. Mayashitanam naradara kena. They just think, yeah, he's an ordinary person. So even if you tell people he's Supreme Personality of Godhead, if they're atheistic, they're not going to believe you, and they'll just deride you. Prabhu.
I noticed that there's this phenomenon potentially since the time of Prabhupada, but specifically after the time of Prabhupada, where there's a tendency towards wanting to find shortcuts. And specifically you find, like, during the time of Prabhupada, devotees were really into this mood of of preaching and going out, spreading the Sankirtan movement, and working very, very hard. Even if they weren't necessarily philosophically grounded all the time, they would read Prabhupada's books to and from Sankirtan spots. They were going into countries which were war-torn and kind of obliviously entering into such circumstances, but working very hard to spread Krishna consciousness. And then, as time went on, after the disappearance of Prabhupada, it seems like this mood was potentially lost to a certain degree due to various circumstances. And then, in order to achieve higher states of devotional service, there arose different ideas of shortcuts. And just how do we, when we see this in devotees in the movement who we care about, how do we direct them? Like, what's a response to it that's positive and progressive and can get people on the right track, or just comments about that mood in general, and what's the root of it?
Well, first I just need to challenge your premise a little bit.
Okay.
It's almost like there's in sociology and history, there's the theory of the noble savage. That just because somebody grew up on the land somewhere, they're better than other people or something like that. They didn't have base instincts. And we could also oversimplify or consider a period of time in ISKCON to be utopian. Whereas there were combinations of all those things back then. I mean, even in the early days, of course, you mentioned people reading Prabhupada's books avidly. Not everybody did that. Prabhupada was encouraging everyone to read his books, and some people were really into it, and other people, they still haven't cracked the book that much. They just weren't inclined. But Prabhupada encouraged everybody, because even some people didn't chant their rounds, but he encouraged them to do in service, because he saw what could bring out the best in everybody. And also, it's not that there weren't schisms. Obviously there were, as you know, in history. Different things came out when devotees were trying to figure out how everything worked. Or there could have been some people who were not just trying to figure things out, sincerely trying, but who were crooked in some way, and then deviated. I mean, some people left Prabhupada because they became overly intelligent. Like one of the Prabhupada's Sanskrit editors had left Prabhupada, and he had the audacity to ask Prabhupada on the way out the door if he could recommend a bona fide spiritual master for him. And Prabhupada wasn't too pleased with that. But so I'm just saying, it's not like, this period it was the noble savage. Everything changed over time. There's always been various currents and different kinds of people, because people are people, and there are always differences of opinion, and there's also always some kind of strife when you're dealing with communities of devotees. Having said that, the remedy is always the same thing: hearing and chanting, especially reading Prabhupada's books. Because as Radhika Raman Prabhu so eloquently pointed out, the importance of sampradaya and being loyal to your community. I mean, you can go and collect from everybody, and that's been there. After Prabhupada left, people definitely spread out in different directions. But even when he was there, I have a godbrother who left, and he took shelter of Ban Maharaj, and then Prabhupada moved people out of Ban Maharaj's ashram because he was influencing them to give up Prabhupada and get reinitiated and stuff like that. So there were those types of things during that era. But then after Prabhupada left, of course, people went in several different directions, and then it became many later. And still doing different moods. And that's why I brought up that question to Radhika Raman Prabhu, because I said, well, even within ISKCON, there's all kinds of different moods and ideas about things, and how about that? So it's complex. So simple straightforward hearing and chanting, reading Prabhupada's books. It's the primal sound of our organization. That's where you get the connection, is to hear it, what Prabhupada wrote. That's most important. And Prabhupada was eager for everyone to read his books for that very reason, because he poured his self, he poured himself into the books. So that's really important. And then also the missionary spirit, taking time to go out. You can't replace that with anything else. You can become even if you become a scholar of Prabhupada's books, but you don't show mercy to others, it's not going to be the same effect. Both things have to be there. Because when you go out and you try to teach people Krishna consciousness, first of all, you realize what Prabhupada went through. He suffered the same grief of teaching people. And you also become adept at reading Prabhupada's books because you get questions and challenges and so forth. And then also you get seeing people categorically reject them, and then you can see that same tendency in yourself for atheism. And then you can see people who spontaneously embrace them, and you can see how you might say, oh, I wish I had as much enthusiasm as they did. In other words, it's uplifting to go out and present it to other people. So those two things, on a simple level, is organizing ways in which to hear, especially from Prabhupada's books, and emphasizing that it's important to assimilate what we already have before branching out too far. I usually talk about 80-20, 80% core, 20% reference and explore to try to understand the Vaishnava canon. But even in that, be really aware of the fact that the various ways people translate could be off. So, yeah, I once asked Sridhar Maharaj, which Mahabharata should I read? He said, don't read the Mahabharata, just read the Bhagavatam. He said, because everything's confirmed in the Bhagavatam, and there's so many editions of the Mahabharata, you can't tell which one's which, and which ones have been interpolated. So he said, just study the Bhagavatam, and everything you need to know is in there. So, who's done that? A few people, huh? Not many. But those who have are noticeably enlightened by reading the Bhagavatam. So just to summarize, I would say reading Prabhupada's books in a group and discussing them, as Prabhupada said, thoroughly threadbare, and then organizing to go out and not just sell them to other people, but also to bring them into the circle and get them into the same vibration. As in Prabhupada's, he manifests like a hologram, comes right into the room. People get that direct experience. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm still just wondering where some people think, well, Prabhupada's books aren't enough, there must be something more, and where does that tendency come from, where people think in that way? Because it's quite common, I've seen, at least amongst younger generations of devotees that I'm witnessing even now. There's this drifting from the mood of Prabhupada's books, where it's clearly there is so much contained in there, and there's a specific mood of service which is pulled out. But I just noticed this tendency that we need something more. And to me it seems like a shortcut type of mentality, like a cheating mentality. And it happens more often than not, I see, in just discussions with devotees and moods amongst devotees.
Well, the grass is always greener on the other side. It's easier to shift to something else rather than go deeply into what you have. I had a business for a while, 10 years in fact, and in it I trained people how to start their own business. And I had a straightforward way of teaching it, and it was very effective, but you had to be really patient, like with anything else. And I found so many people, they'd start and then I'm going to do something. It can't be me, it must be the business. I'm going to go do something else. They'd switch, jump ship, and go do another thing. And I just noticed that it's a human tendency to maybe not put in the work right where you are now. Like even the Bhagavad Gita. What's wrong with the Bhagavad Gita? Nothing. And if you really go into the Bhagavad Gita and get absorbed in it, you'll feel a personal relationship with Krishna. And those who have the adhikari for it, as they develop adhikari, they'll even see Madhurya Rasa or whatever. You're going to see everything within the book that you're reading now, because it's your qualification. It's not how extensively you read in the bigger Vaishnava canon. And yes, I think that there is some sense, I can see it in myself, you want to beat everybody to the draw. Like if there's going to be a conversation, I want to make sure I have a trump card somewhere. Shouldn't use that word. I have a card hidden somewhere where I can pull it out and say, yeah, but I got something better. I brought that up to Radhika. I don't know if you remember during the talk. I said sometimes people have this way in any conversation. I was asking him how he deals with it. In fact, I wrote down the answer. It's probably in my book. That people often have a card up their sleeve. So when you're discussing a point, and then they'll bring up some obscure Purana or something else and have, oh yeah, you just don't know this part of the Leela. It feels as if there's some one-upsmanship going on in those type of things. Sometimes it can be really helpful, but I always want it nailed down also. Like, where'd you get it from? Because so many things float around.
Find a kernel of truth in it, right?
Yeah, is that what he said for that one? I have it in here somewhere.
And then refocus it to the Bhagavatam, something related.
Yeah, that's right. Find a kernel of truth, what they said, refocus it on the Bhagavatam. Yeah. I'll look at my notes more carefully later, but that was the essence of it. Anything else? Yes.
There are some reflections online.
Oh goodness.
Marve, she or he.
Who?
Marve.
How do you-
Marvey. Marve.
Okay.
It is not easy to love the good and the bad. Sometimes we have to use force. These are three reflections at certain times. So, and the third one is light ignites and truth reveals. We all want to save, but not everybody is ready.
You sure that's not an AI robot saying that? It sounds too poetical for me. Like sometimes AI gives us stuff that, like, wow, that sounds really cool. And I look at it and go, you didn't say anything. Not that yours were like that. I appreciate the light and the... Is that it?
Yeah, there are 22 odd.
Thank you for tuning in, and I appreciate your comments. Yeah, it's hard to appreciate the good and the bad. And the light, what about the light?
Light ignites and truth reveals.
Light ignites. I like that.
We all want to save, but not everybody is ready.
So true. So true. We have to be discriminatory. That's the directive we get from Bhagavatam, Ishvare Taradineshu, etc. Any other thoughts? I'll read a couple more verses if I may, unless I have overtime.
No, we have till 7:30.
We'll be here all night, folks. Okay, the internal devotees or potencies are all eternal associates in the pastimes of the Lord. Only with them does the Lord advent to propound the Sankirtan movement. Only with them does the Lord taste the mellow of conjugal love, and only with them does he distribute this love of God to people in general. I mean, some people I've noticed have a natural attraction for reading a lot of different things, and I don't want to immediately suspect their motive or say that only I know how to, how to navigate through. As I noticed, even some young people, like even kids, because I've been dealing with a lot of kids somehow or other, and it's been edifying for me because I noticed some really young kids. At first, when I was interacting with them and they'd say stuff, I go like, you must have rehearsed that, because it sounded a little too elevated or something. But then as I got to know them, they kept saying it. And I'm like, where did that come from? A lot of them have a natural taste for hearing certain things. And I don't want to be too suspect, especially when it's kind of spontaneous. And some people, gravitate to a lot of these things. But we should be cautious. It should be done under guidance and not willy-nilly, and also not prematurely. I mean, that's the ongoing advice. But still, I do notice that some people have a greater capacity and desire to hear a lot of different things, and it's not always just to jump in front of everybody else. So I just want to distinguish say that there are different reasons. Purport: distinguishing between pure devotees and internal or confidential devotees. Sri Rupa Goswami, in his book Upadeshamrita, traces the following gradual process of development. Out of many thousands of karmis, one is better when he is situated in perfect knowledge. Out of many such learned scholars and philosophers, one who is actually liberated from material bondage is better, and out of many such persons who are actually liberated, one who is a devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is considered to be the best. Among the many such transcendental lovers of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the gopis are the best, and among the gopis, Srimati Radhika is the best. Srimati Radhika is very dear to Lord Kṛṣṇa, and similarly, her pawns, namely Shamakund and Radhakund, are also very dear to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur comments in his Anubhashya that among the 5 tattvas, 2 are energies, Shakti tattva, and the 3 others are energetic, Shaktiman tattva. Unalloyed and internal devotees are both engaged in the favorable culture of Krishna consciousness, untinged by philosophical speculation or fruitive activities. They are all understood to be pure devotees, and those among them who simply engage in conjugal love are called Madhurya Bhaktas, or internal devotees. They are all understood to be pure devotees, and those among them who simply engage in conjugal love are called Madhurya Bhaktas, or internal devotees. The loving services in parental love, fraternity, and servitude are included in conjugal love of God. In conclusion, therefore, every confidential devotee is a pure devotee of the Lord. It bears repeating those last few sentences because it goes to what you were saying, you indicated in response to something I said, that goes towards the theory of it's everything orchestrated around the point of Madhurya as the ultimate thing, but it all contributes in different ways, and everyone enjoys it to the full extent, fully, not that they're dissatisfied or something. They are all understood to be pure devotees, and those among them who simply engage in conjugal love are called Madhurya Bhaktas, or internal devotees. The loving services in parental love, fraternity, and servitude are included in conjugal love of God. In conclusion, therefore, every confidential devotee is a pure devotee of the Lord. Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu enjoys his pastimes with his immediate expansion, Nityananda Prabhu, his pure devotees, and his three Purusha incarnations, namely Karnadakshay Vishnu, Garbhadakshay Vishnu, and Shirdakshay Vishnu, always accompany the Supreme Lord to propound the Sankirtan movement. How'd you like it if Mahavishnu came to your door? Vaitacharya went on door-to-door Sankirtan. You know that? No. God comes to your door. You want to take one of these? No, thank you. The characteristics of Krishna are understood to be a storehouse of transcendental love. Although that storehouse of love certainly came with Krishna when he was present, it was sealed. But when Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu came with his associates of the Panchatattva, they broke the seal and plundered the storehouse to taste transcendental love of Krishna. The more they tasted it, the more their thirst for it grew. Purport, Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu is called Mahavaranyaya Avatar because although he is Sri Krishna himself, he's even more favorably disposed to the poor fallen souls than Lord Sri Krishna. When Lord Sri Krishna himself was personally present, he demanded that everyone surrender unto him and promised that he would give one all protection. But when Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu came to this earth with his associates, he simply distributed transcendental love of God without discrimination. Sri Rupa Goswami, therefore, could understand that Lord Chaitanya was none other than Sri Krishna himself, for no one but the Supreme Personality of Godhead can distribute confidential love of the Supreme Person. Sri Panchatattva themselves danced again and again, and thus made it easier to drink nectarian love of Godhead. They danced, cried, laughed, and chanted like madmen, and in this way they distributed love. Puna puna, again and again, piyaya, caused to drink. Hai becomes mahatmata, highly ecstatic. Mahamata means like kind of mad. Nache, dances. I like the emphasis here on the dancing because when we were in South India and we were going to all these different temples, I was, just thinking of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, how when he would go before any of these deities, it's described in the Chaitanya Charita, he would dance in ecstasy. And it helped me to appreciate the mood in South India more through the eyes of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, that everywhere he went, he found that kind of ecstasy that he expressed even in Vrindavan, the dancing and so forth. And you can't artificially dance like that in ecstasy unless you're motivated on a much higher level. People generally cannot understand the actual meaning of chanting and dancing. Describing the Goswamis, Sri Srinivasa Acharya stated, Krishnot Kirtana Gana Nartana Paro. Not only did Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates demonstrate this chanting and dancing, but the 6 Goswamis also followed in the next generation. The present Krishna conscious movement follows the same principle. And therefore, simply by chanting and dancing, we have received good responses all over the world. It is to be understood, however, that this chanting and dancing do not belong to this material world. They are actually transcendental activities, for the more one engages in chanting and dancing, the more he could taste the nectar of transcendental love of Godhead. In distributing love of Godhead, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates did not consider who was a fit candidate and who was not, nor where such distribution should or should not take place. They made no conditions. Wherever they got the opportunity, the members of the Panchatattva distributed love of Godhead. Purport, there are some rascals who dare to speak against the mission of Lord Chaitanya by criticizing the Krishna conscious movement for accepting Europeans and Americans as brahmanas and offering them sannyas. But here is an authoritative statement that in distributing love of Godhead, one should not consider whether the recipients are European, Americans, Hindus, Muslims, etc. The Krishna conscious movement should be spread wherever possible, and one should accept those who thus become Vaishnavas as being greater than Brahmanas, Hindus, or Indians. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu desired that his name be spread in each and every town and village on the surface of the globe. Therefore, when the cult of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is spread all over the world, should those who embrace it not be accepted as Vaishnavas, Brahmins, and Sannyasis? Those foolish arguments are sometimes raised by envious rascals, but Krishna-conscious devotees do not care about them. We strictly follow the principles set down by the Panchatattva. Lutiya kaya diya bandara ujade ashcharya bandara prem shata guna bhare. Lutiya, it's the same in English, loot. It means plundering. When there's looting going on, it comes from Sanskrit Bengali. Isn't that amazing? Although the members of the Panchatattva plundered the storehouse of love of God and ate and distributed its contents, there was no scarcity, for this wonderful storehouse is so complete that as the love is distributed, the supply increases hundreds of times. I've seen looting before. Everybody probably has. There have been looting in various cities around the world when there's a breakdown in the social order. People.
Oakland on a daily basis.
What's that?
In
Oh,
Oakland on a daily basis.
yeah, they just go and steal out of the stores, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, San Francisco. Although Daniel Lurie, the new mayor, is cracking down. I remember seeing after riots and stuff, now you don't have to wait for that. I guess people just go and take stuff. But you just see everyone smashing windows and just carrying stuff out. And it's the same sense as being presented here, is how they had no consideration of decorum. Firstly, because they're mad out of intoxication, love of God. And there's that meme about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu being like the emperor who gets intoxicated. He takes all the most valuable heirloom jewels from the treasury and then goes down to the common road and starts giving them out as he's singing and dancing, like one for you and one for you. That kind of idea. And it's revolutionary because most systems, religious systems, and the Vedic system included, tend to restrict over time who gets access to everything. Can only go through a particular class, and that has to be hereditary and so forth. It's kind of like the Michel's iron laws of oligarchy. Somebody has a noble idea and they start to do it, but once they get power, then they forget about the noble idea and they just try to keep the power. Happens in religions. And then some reformer comes, like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and just breaks it open. Says everybody could have access. A pseudo-incarnation of Kṛṣṇa once told his disciple that he had emptied himself by giving him all knowledge and was thus spiritually bankrupt. Such bluffers speak in this way to cheat the public, but actual spiritual consciousness is so perfect that the more it is distributed, the more it increases. Bankruptcy is a term that applies in the material world, but the storehouse of love of Godhead in the spiritual world can never be depleted. Kṛṣṇa is providing for millions and trillions of living entities by supplying all their necessities. And even if all the innumerable living entities wanted to become Krishna conscious, there would be no scarcity of love of Godhead, nor would there be insufficiency in providing for their maintenance. Our Krishna conscious movement was started single-handedly and no one provided for our livelihood. But at present, we are spending hundreds and thousands of dollars all over the world. And the movement is increasing more and more. Thus, there is no question of scarcity. Although jealous persons may be envious, if we stick to our principles and follow in the footsteps of the Panchatattva, this movement will go on unchecked by imitation, swamis, sannyasis, religionists, philosophers, or scientists. For it is transcendental to all material considerations. Therefore, those who propagate the Krishna conscious movement should not be afraid of such fools and rascals. You ready for the next verse? These are so good. Every one of them fills you up to the brim. Ucha lila prema vanya chodika vidaya. Stri vrida balaka yuva shabare dubai. The flood of love of God had swelled in all directions, and thus young men, old men, women, and children were all immersed in the inundation. Purport. When the contents of the storehouse of love of Godhead is thus distributed, there is a powerful inundation that covers the entire land. In Sri Mayapur, there is sometimes a great flood after the rainy season. This is an indication that from the birthplace of Lord Caitanya, the inundation of love of Godhead should be spread all over the world. For this will help everyone, including old men, young men, women, and children. The Krishna conscious movement of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was so powerful that it can inundate the entire world and interest all classes of men in the subject of love of Godhead. Sajjan Durjana Pangu Jada Andagana Prema Vanyaya Dubhaila Jagatera Jana. The Krishna conscious movement will inundate the entire world and drown everyone. Whether one be a gentleman, a rogue, or even lame, invalid, or blind. Purport. Here again, it may be emphasized that although jealous rascals protest that Europeans and Americans cannot be given the sacred thread or sannyas, there is no need even to consider whether one is a gentleman or a rogue, because this is a spiritual movement which is not concerned with the external body of skin and bones, because it is being properly conducted under the guidance of the Panchatattva. Strictly following the regulative principles, it has nothing to do with external impediments. When the 5 members of the Panchatattva saw the entire world drowned in love of Godhead, and the seed of material enjoyment in the living entities completely destroyed, they all became exceedingly happy. Purport. In this connection, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur writes in his Anubhashya that since the living entities all belong to the marginal potency of the Lord, each and every living entity has a natural tendency to become Krishna conscious. Although at the same time the seed of material enjoyment is undoubtedly within him. The seed of material enjoyment watered by the course of material nature fructifies to become a tree of material entanglement that endows the living entity with all kinds of material enjoyment. To enjoy such material facilities is to be afflicted with the 3 material miseries. However, when by nature's law there is a flood, the seeds within the earth become inactive. Similarly, as the inundation of love of Godhead spreads all over the world, the seeds of material enjoyment become impotent. Thus, the more the Krishna consciousness movement spreads, the more the desire for material enjoyment decreases. The seed of material enjoyment automatically becomes impotent with the increase of the Krishna consciousness movement. Instead of being envious that Krishna consciousness is spreading all over the world by the grace of Lord Chaitanya, those who are jealous should be happy, as indicated here by the words parama ulasa. But because there are Kṛṣṇa adhikaris or prakrita bhaktas, materialistic devotees who are not advanced in spiritual knowledge, they are envious instead of happy, and they try to find faults in the Krishna consciousness movement. Yet Srimat Prabodhananda Saraswati writes in his Caitanya Chantamrita that when influenced by Lord Chaitanya's Krishna conscious movement, materialists become averse to talking about their wives and children. Supposedly learned scholars give up their tedious studies of Vedic literature. Yogis give up their impractical practices of mystic yoga. Ascetics give up their austere activities of penance and austerity, and sannyasis give up their study of Sankhya philosophy. Thus, they are all attracted by the bhakti yoga practices of Lord Chaitanya and cannot relish a mellow superior to that of Krishna consciousness. Any comments, thoughts, questions? Jata jata prema vrishti kari prema jane tata bade jal vyapi tri bhuvane. The more the 5 members of the Panchatattva cause the rains of love of Godhead to fall, the more the inundation increases and spreads all over the world. The Krishna conscious movement is not stereotyped or stagnant. It will spread all over the world in spite of all objections by fools and rascals that European and American mlechas cannot be accepted as brahmanas and sannyasis. Here it is indicated that this process will spread and inundate the entire world with Krishna consciousness. Yes?
I was just thinking how much faith Prabhupada has in his European and American followers, and how we really should rise to the occasion of what he's expecting us to do. It shouldn't just take it automatic that, okay, Prabhupada spoke this and now he has our back. But actually we should live up to what Prabhupada fought for so much that, no, these European and American boys and girls, they're Vaishnavas, they're sannyasis, they're brahmanas. And he really worked hard to establish that amongst his godbrothers in India and on a worldwide platform. And how his followers should make it a point that we're actually coming to that standard which he expected. Otherwise, we could make him look bad at the people who were criticizing him.
Yeah, and Prabhupada stood up for his European and American disciples. There are times I can remember off the top of my head when, as an example, I remember when, I think it was Dr. Patel in Juhu, Prabhupada was going for morning walks and they had these arguments and stuff. During one walk, Dr. Patel said, oh, I read the Bhagavatam in Sanskrit. And he said it in such a way that one of the devotees that was there was saying, oh, you think he was indicating actually that we weren't getting the same thing because we couldn't read it in Sanskrit. And Prabhupada intervened and said, no, it's translated. So I translated and they are getting it. I just remember it was a subtle point, but Prabhupada stood up for the fact that he was condescending and saying, you guys aren't going to get it completely. And I remember also I remember because it's in the record that there was an Indian man who came to Prabhupada who was coming regularly and was favorable, who said to Prabhupada that during a Janmashtami ceremony at one of the Gaudiya Mats, there's a godbrother there who was envious of Prabhupada's success, and he was criticizing the Krishna consciousness movement. And he had read an article to his congregation that was in the paper about some trouble the devotees had in Japan. And he was saying they're like black sheep and they're causing problems around the world. That was his mood, just see. And Prabhupada, first of all, he said to this man, he said, did you tell him that he is a Pamara? And the man said, no, I didn't tell him anything. He's a simple, nice man. Prabhupada said, then you can go back and you meet with him and you say, "Sir, excuse me, I forgot to tell you one thing." He said, "What is that?" He said, "You are a Pamara." He's like a low-class person. And he said, because he said that bees, they seek honey, whereas flies, they try to find the unsavory things. And then Prabhupada told how he was saying about Japan, and one of the devotees was from the Japan party. It was Yashodanandan Swami. And he said, "But Prabhupada, we're going to get you kicked out of Japan." And Prabhupada said, "That is all right. That is all right." He said once there were two men talking, and one man said, "I have lost 10,000. He didn't say 10,000 what. He just said, "I've lost 10,000. And the other man said, "Well, you're so lucky. I didn't have 10,000 to lose." He said, so on one hand, this person is criticizing our movement. He said, but at least we were in Japan to get kicked out. Probably didn't care that that Yashodan said we didn't really get kicked out. But, he said, but at least we were there to get kicked out. Where were you? And so he's making several points, but one of the overarching feelings I get when I hear that is how Prabhu defended his American European disciples and didn't let people disparage them or kick them around and say, "Oh, they're just this, they can't read, they can't do this." No, he was very protective of them. And so sometimes people try to bring in this vibration that, Prabhupada didn't think much of his people, that's why we should go to somebody else. He delegated to somebody else, and they were just, losers or something like that. But you can't find that evidence in the record. Throughout Prabhupada's sojourn, he always defended, as you're saying, and elevated him. And it's an important point. We represent, if we are not black sheep, we're the dark horse, and it's good for us to come from behind and show Prabhupada's potency by doing something wonderful. Prabhupada wanted that. Anything else? You want to hear another verse?
Yes.
The impersonalist, fruit of workers, false logicians, blasphemers, non-devotees, and lowest among the student community are very expert in avoiding the Krishna consciousness movement, and therefore the inundation of Krishna consciousness cannot touch them. Purport: like Mayavadi philosophers in the past, such as Prakashananda, Saraswati of Benares, modern impersonalists are not interested in Lord Chaitanya's Krishna consciousness movement. They do not know the value of this material world. They consider it false and cannot understand how the Krishna consciousness movement can utilize it. That's an interesting statement. It kind of hits the ear in a way in which you have to backtrack and look at it again. They do not know the value of this material world. Because we could say, Abrahma Bhuvana Loka, from top to bottom, it's useless. But from the viewpoint of using everything in Krishna's service to spread the Sankirtan movement, the statement, they do not know the value of this material world, it's a very optimistic, uplifting philosophy, that everything's here is paraphernalia to be used in the service of the Lord. The Mayavadis who say it doesn't even exist, it's just an illusion, or those who are false renunciates, they artificially renounce it. But this, they do not know the value of the material world. Such value here. They consider it false and cannot understand how the Krishna conscious movement can utilize it. They're so absorbed in impersonal thought that they take it for granted that all spiritual variety is material. Because they do not know anything beyond their misconception of the Brahmajyoti, they cannot understand that Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is spiritual and therefore beyond the conception of material illusion. Whenever Krishna incarnates personally or as a devotee, these Mayavadi philosophers accept him as an ordinary human being. This is condemned in the Bhagavad Gita 9:11. Avajananti mambudha manushim tanum ashritam parang bhavam ajananto mama bhuta maheshwaram. Fools deride me when I descend in the human form, They do not know my transcendental nature as the Supreme Lord of all that be. There are also other unscrupulous persons who exploit the Lord's appearance by posing as incarnations to cheat the innocent public. An incarnation of God should pass the tests of the statements of the Shastras and also perform uncommon activities. One should not accept a rascal as an incarnation of God, but should test his ability to act as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. For example, Krishna taught Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, and Arjuna also accepted him as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But for our understanding, Arjuna requested the Lord to manifest his universal form, thus testing whether he was actually the Supreme Lord. Similarly, one must test a so-called incarnation of Godhead according to the standard criteria. To avoid being misled by exhibition of mystic powers, it is best to examine a so-called incarnation of God in the light of the statements of the Shastras. Caitanya Mahaprabhu is described in the Shastras as an incarnation of Krishna. Therefore, if one wants to imitate Lord Caitanya and claim to be an incarnation, he must show evidence from the Shastras about his appearance to substantiate his claim. I was just thinking of Radhika's presentation, how he gave multiple layers of criteria to understand what is authorized Shastra. It's helpful to have that context to understand. One of the discussions that he brought up was some people say, well, I have my Shastra, your Shastra, what's the difference? And so he gave criteria for understanding the efficacy of certain Shastras or the extent to which they are effective in helping us. Okay, next verse is, seeing that the Mayavadis and others were fleeing, Lord Chaitanya thought, I wanted everyone to be immersed in this inundation of love of Godhead, but some of them have escaped. Therefore I shall devise a trick to drown them also. Purport. Here is an important point. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wanted to invent a way to capture the Mayavadis and others who did not take interest in the Krishna consciousness movement. This is the symptom of an acharya. An acharya who comes for the service of the Lord cannot be expected to conform to a stereotype, for he must find the ways and means by which Krishna consciousness may be spread. Sometimes jealous persons criticize the Krishna conscious movement because it engages equally both boys and girls in distributing love of Godhead. Not knowing that boys and girls in countries like Europe and America mix very freely, these fools and rascals criticize the boys and girls in Krishna consciousness for intermingling. But these rascals should consider that one cannot suddenly change a community's social customs. However, since both the boys and girls are being trained to become preachers, those girls are not ordinary girls, but are as good as their brothers who are preaching Krishna consciousness. Therefore, to engage both boys and girls in fully transcendental activities is a policy intended to spread the Krishna consciousness movement. These jealous fools who criticize the intermingling of boys and girls will certainly have to be satisfied with their own foolishness, because they cannot think of how to spread Krishna consciousness by adopting ways and means that are favorable for this purpose. Their stereotype methods will never help spread Krishna consciousness. Therefore, what we are doing is perfect by the grace of Lord Chaitanya, for it is he who proposed to invent a way to capture those who strayed from Krishna consciousness. Comments, reflections, questions? Yeah.
So this purport is quoted a lot, and it's kind of polarizing in this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of really amazing points that Prabhupada makes here. And one thing that always kind of stood out to me was this statement that the rascals should consider that one cannot suddenly change a community's social customs. So it seems like this statement kind of shows that Prabhupada did want to change the social customs of the people, but for the time, place, and circumstance, he was kind of engaging in them according to where they were at. So does this show that Prabhupada didn't want this to always be the case, that there were free mixing of men and women, that he wanted to move towards a more traditional or conservative kind of social ecosystem in ISKCON?
Well, thinking anecdotally from live incidents that occurred within ISKCON, there was an incident in Berkeley where the devotees had assumed that's what Prabhupada wanted, and therefore they banned the women from chanting in the temple, because after all, they were distracting the men from thinking of Krishna, and had asked them not to come in the temple room. And Prabhupada then reversed that and said, no, they should, if you should go out if you're that agitated. And he didn't. He also demonstratively, when he went to India, I mean, there was some demonstration. Like he did have Jamuna sing the kirtan, and there were some times when he asked one of his women disciples to give a talk. At those times, it was more that what I noticed was there was oftentimes a push to reform the culture, to be more conservative amongst the devotees that Prabhupada resisted. I mean, I could think of more cases that we'd have to look at them all, and of course, like you say, there's a back and forth on it. But what I remember more was devotees becoming more concerned with changing the culture, and then Prabhupada walking it back. Like the example I gave, with Berkeley is like, hey, no women in here. Because it was a predominantly brahmachari and sannyasi environment, and of course the women were there. And so it was even more pronounced back then. And the tendency, of course, with everybody is whatever group is there, they want to become the most noticed or predominant. And even with householders, Prabhupada was careful to balance things out. Like in Detroit, there was this whole room full of brahmacharis and sannyasis. And there was this one householder there, and he asked Prabhupada, he said that all these disciples, they can do so much service, and I have 3 kids, I work outside, I live in a house. How can I even be part of this movement? And Prabhupada said, this temple is made of brick and stone. Your house is made of brick and stone. He said, in the temple, the business is for Krishna. If in your house, the business is for Krishna, no difference. I was like, no difference. So it's not the exact same question, but it was Prabhupada's mood to equalize a lot of things. Like there was more seemingly a tendency from the side of the devotees to want to discriminate about everybody else except for them, for instance. And it's still in the same vein as like householders and renunciates. But when the first householders started appearing, there's even a derogatory term for them, which was fringies. Because everyone was used to living in the temple, but then when devotees would go live outside, we called them fringies. It just became part of the vocabulary. And, Prabhupada said and did encouraging things for people in all the different classes and sexes, whatever they were, to try to encourage him. I remember in Los Angeles, he went out of his way to empower his women disciples to go on book distribution. He specifically would mention them, it's on record, and he also, when they'd come back from Sankirtan, he'd invite them to come to his room, give them special consideration because they're out in the field. And, he never tried to walk back there. He said you should have be a lion on the chase, a lamb at home. But he was glorifying them as warriors, going out and being effective and things like that. So again, this is all anecdotal kind of stuff, but still I got the feeling that Prabhupada was fighting against the tide of the natural way people divide up and they say, just us and not you guys. So I felt a lot of that kind of energy from Prabhupada to make sure that devotees didn't pull into exclusive groups and say, only we can do this. Yes?
Anecdotally, just on the other side, there is a pastime in Yamuna's biography which she marks as one of the most kind of tide-changing circumstances in her life, where up until this time she had a habit of sitting very close to Prabhupada during his classes. And then during Magh Mela in 1971, she was doing that, and one sannyasi who had learned a lot of cultural things staying in the Gaudiya Math was trying to implement those things, and he approached Yamuna and told her, Yamuna, do you see where all the women are sitting? And then they were sitting in the back, and he said, you should also be sitting there. And so Prabhupada was in his quarters once at Magh Mela, and Yamuna was hanging up her clothes from washing, and Prabhupada called her over, and he said, so you do not like to hear me anymore? And Yamuna became quite emotional. She said, no, that's not the case, because actually she's becoming very attached to those classes. But then she said, but actually a sannyasi told me that as a woman I should sit in the back, as that's the etiquette. And then Prabhupada paused and he said, yes, that is the etiquette. But then they went into a discussion about proximity to the Guru in terms of physical and vibrational. And Prabhupada was encouraging her relationship with vibration, emphasizing that he didn't have so much association with his spiritual master, but his godbrothers did. But he also said that many of his godbrothers drew blood. And then he said, I'm speaking these lectures for you, and because a disciple is close to the Guru based on how they're following the instructions of the spiritual master. So there's also another instance in the Transcendental Diary of Harisari where there was a letter which came in about a brahmachari and a brahmacharini wanting to get married because they had been doing service in the Pujari room, and Prabhupada became quite upset, and he asked a letter be sent to all the ISKCON temples that no more men and women should be doing service in the Pujari room. He made a very strong statement about it, actually. So how do we balance these instances with other instances where it looks like Prabhupada was also encouraging the culture?
Yeah, balance is the key. Because it's so easy to go one way or the other. And, Magh Mela, then you may say, in certain circumstances, is it the same in the West? Because Prabhupada does, in his purports, distinguish between preaching in the West and also in India. And Caitanya Mahaprabhu was similarly inclined. Obviously, as Kaviraj Goswami points out, he took sannyas, not because he was interested in sannyas, but because he was interested in having those people, from a cultural point of view, be more inclined to him in such a way that they would naturally be inundated. As I mentioned here, he wanted to pull them in, so it was utilitarian. It wasn't so much that, we want the culture of sannyas now, and that's important. It wasn't important. What was important to Caitanya Mahaprabhu was that people respected him so that he could preach Krishna consciousness. But then you get him in the Caitanya Charitamrita being very aware of the etiquette in the public there for a sannyasi. He was very careful about that and guarded by it. That's why he had those quarrels with different devotees who tried to induce him to take, worldly sense gratification. Like, we'll make you a bed. It's like, why are you making me a bed? I'm a sannyasi. Or, here's some oil. It's like, I can't wear that. So he was careful, but why was he careful also? Because he said, they'll consider me a Dari sannyasi. And then why was that? Not just for the sake of being a strict sannyasi, but because they would not consider him favorably. And so just in practical terms, in the West, as you were mentioning here on campus, students have a certain cultural perspective, and it's not that we just first all, on one side, we can just insist upon putting forward a certain etiquette to them that they wouldn't get at all. They just think that we were Taliban-esque. And at the same time, as people come closer, there's a carefulness that's even there in the Bhagavatam with these Balavan Indriyan Gramo Vidvamsam Apikarshati, be careful. Because it's not that we just say, well, it doesn't matter. No, it matters. It's there in the Bhagavatam because man is like butter, woman's like a butter pot. So as far as men and women go, extreme caution is expressed by Shukadeva Goswami and others in the Bhagavatam. So we have to be careful. At the same time, we also have to see how we're coming into a culture and encouraging people to, take up Krishna consciousness. So, you have a point. You can't, abruptly or suddenly. But at the same time, we can't also fall into the side of like, it's all about the etiquette. I mean, etiquette's important for the point of being able to be Krishna conscious and not fall victim to false association in the material world, and those types of things should be carefully guarded. But then we also have to consider the context that it's happening in also, so we don't alienate people. And Prabhupada was expert at balancing those things. I mean, he did so many revolutionary things like doing marriages himself because he saw the need for it to create a community and a society, and who else was going to do it? He was the only one there, and he talks about it in his purport. So it is a balancing kind of thing, and I think balance means, you consider, when you're balancing, it's not like you're completely still. You're fighting from going off one side or the other. Like when you're balancing, you feel yourself going this way and you pull back to the center, and then you go too far that way and you pull back. So we have to be considerate of both of those things. It goes on Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Leela because as externally, he was very careful about the etiquettes. But internally, he loved it when his devotees broke those out of love. And for a higher purpose, helping people, yenitena prakarina. Like I've had several times on Sankirtan, a person was smoking a cigarette, and I could see he's not going to be able to get in his wallet unless I hold the cigarette. A lit cigarette. I remember I was in Haight-Ashbury, I'm holding the cigarette while he's digging in his pocket. And some devotees were walking by and like, yeah, that's a good look. And it's, we just symbolic of how we'll do what's needed in a certain circumstance in order to get the job done. Yes, Prabhu?
I heard that more of this cultural thing came
after the first batch of devotees went back to India in the early days.
Mm.
And before that, there was like a family environment.
Yeah.
And no one really ever thought of these things. But as they visited India and they came back, then more of these things started coming up.
Absolutely. And quite naturally so, because how would devotees know? And Prabhupada did observe some etiquettes. Pradyumna tells in his memories of Srila Prabhupada, he was sitting on the ground in front of Prabhupada, and he was slightly in front of one of his godbrothers who was senior to him. And Prabhupada said, no, you shouldn't. You should move back because he is your da. He's your senior. And so he observed that. And yeah, I remember at times things came from India and then the conception of how it should be done or not done would change because of getting outside information. But it wasn't necessarily all from Prabhupada. In other words, he came from India. He could have just brought it in all of a sudden. But a lot of times devotees brought things, different styles, different etiquettes, and the movement did change. It changed over time because partly sociologically it was just a small group and it was family-like. Everybody knew one another. Even the first time I went to Mayapur, it was most of the people in the movement were all there on the campus. I mean, maybe that's an exaggeration, but a lot of them, at least half the movement was there. And then later as things grew, I mean, I grew it in I came in at a spike time, so it was moving away from that family-like environment.
So is it fair to... Because sometimes I hear a philosophy like we have to move it to the way things were in 1967 in San Francisco, but things weren't a utopia during that time necessarily. There was a lot of people coming in and just disappearing.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you hear this is the way we have to preach now, but it doesn't seem like it's fair to expect things just to go to the way things were in 1967, because this is 2026. There's a circumstance which we have at hand. So how do we deal with these kind of stereotyped ways of adjusting standards? Because I've heard that same concept that things came from India, but it also looks like Prabhupada sometimes embraced those things and he didn't completely level them. He was open to seeing some of those changes be implemented because it was a growing movement and there was a need in order to keep the organization moving in a direction where it wasn't just in and out like it was in 1967. It's such a high rate. It was volatile in 1967, one could say.
Yeah, well, you have to be able to distinguish between principles and details. And then you have to keep in mind what the main purpose is. Yinatena pakarina mana Kṛṣṇa Vaisesika. We have to be able to remember Krishna, and as preachers, we want to be able to induce people to think of Krishna. And what's a natural environment for some is an unnatural environment for others. And we have to be, as Prabhupada said, intelligent to understand the difference between these two things. And a lot of that has to do with what our purpose is and our motivation. Because if my motivation in any circumstance is to become the controller and make sure I dominate, then it's easy to run into the same kind of phenomena that we see religion runs into over time, becoming irrelevant because it just constricts into only these people can do it and other people can't. That's kind of what this chapter is about. Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu revolutionizing and saying everybody gets to come in based on Bhagavatam. And so if we're thoughtful and sensitive when we're forming a community and we see how to apply, first of all, be very clear about what the principles are. And then whatever details are there, seeing how those details can be implemented effectively. I think, making a doctrine that just take it all back to one era or another era or one place or another place, let's just do it the way they do it in this place, that place. For years, I remember after Chowpatty got successful, everyone said, let's just do everything like Chowpatty. And I said, well, good luck, because where are you going to find another Radhanath Swami? You're going to need that. And as far as Varnashram, you're going to need a king, because basically it's kind of a top-down society, or at least you're going to need an efficient Gurukula if you're going to have that. And you have to think about how one situation is different from another. And Prabhupada was running a worldwide movement. Even recently, during the pandemic, when I was communicating with every continent or leaders on every continent, try to get things organized for book distribution, started noticing that there's different cultures. People had different moods. That's where we came up with that mantra, workarounds bring turnarounds. And I think it's helpful to not become stereotyped, but to be dynamic and think of the principle. How is it working in a certain situation? If we go on Sankirtan, can I hold a cigarette for somebody? Or how about a sandwich and I don't know what's in it? I'm holding it so they can give a donation. Am I going to go to hell for that or what? And so I think, we have to be really thoughtful, sensitive, and notice how it works in a particular community. Each one has its own dynamic. And try to apply even the details in such a way that it will enliven the devotees instead of alienate them. So you have to have your finger on the dial and make sure that it can be adjusted in such a way that it facilitates people. Yeah.
Everything should serve this principle of yena prakarena.
It's the only thing that works universally is remembering Krishna and chanting Hare Krishna. Everything else, it just changes over time and it's not fully effective. But if we're married to that, that's the way Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was. He was demonstrative about it. He'd show up at the Radha Kund. There's a picture of him showing up in a car with his disciples dressed in Western clothes and stuff like that. You seen it?
Yeah.
Because he was trying to prove that point of Yukta Vairagya, and he culturally, he would create these festivals in such a way that would pull people in. The exterior rim seemed more like a carnival or something like that. Go on a ride, get some cotton candy, and the closer you got, the more there was kirtan and Krishna Katha and things like that. And that's sort of a blueprint for the way that Prabhupada was doing it. But, we just have to be careful, because otherwise, if we become dedicated to things that are not principled or that aren't the main principles, for the sake of doing them a particular way, it's not necessarily the culture itself is going to induce people to become Krishna conscious. Although there are certain principles, like the free mixing of men and women, and it's a universal principle that there's going to be consequence for that. So there has to be clarity about it and how to do it properly in certain circumstances, or in all circumstances. But if you try to apply it here at Davis immediately, or that's how you preach or something like that, that's what we lead with, then you're leading with your chin, because somebody's going to give you a right hook or an uppercut. Any other thing? Any response or thought about the overall discussion? Because I know you're thoughtful about it, and I just want to make sure that that you've found something in it that might be helpful.
No, definitely. I think recently I've been trying to hear a lot from many devotees' perspectives about current issues and in relation to this, and I'm just kind of trying to understand it in a balanced way, and I think that your presentation is very balanced. So.
Thank you. Could everyone hear when somebody in the audience? Because isn't there another microphone that we pass around for the...
It's out of charge, it seems, Maharaj.
Oh, okay, we're done. Because if we can't broadcast it, I'm not talking.
I remember in LA once, Sura Prabhu got up before the class had actually ended. And then as he walked out the door, he said, now that Sura Prabhu is left, I've lost the impetus to speak.
Who said that?
You did.
I said that?
Yeah, Sura Prabhu got up and left.
That's funny. Sura, what a character. I guess now that it ran out of charge, I can say whatever I want. But yeah, he was one of the most dedicated book distributors I've ever met. He came out of Seattle, circa 1972, and he was on a traveling Sankirtan party, one of the first ones that wasn't Radha Damodar or something. No, there were ones before that, but among the first. And he ended up as temple president in St. Louis. He was the cheap tightwad I've ever met in my life. But it was all justified because whatever money he'd save, he'd use it for sending to the book fund. But you had to be careful because he'd sell anything that wasn't nailed down just to get more money for the book fund. He's a real character. But I went to his memorial after he passed, and I was so impressed with how many people he affected. I didn't even know, even though we were friends, I didn't know how widely he was preaching to the Christian communities and others, and they all came to his memorial service. And talk about culture, ISKCON culture. Some funny thing happened. A couple devotees, when they were glorifying Sura, without really thinking about it, because I think the couple that were the two devotees that were talking don't have much interface with the outside world. They're very sincere, dedicated devotees, have been for years, but when they were talking about Sura, and it's to a mixed audience, they were talking about how such and such or so-and-so got traded.
Like a slave.
Yeah, or at least a baseball player or something. Which was really, it was a phenomenon. We could be traded. I was traded before. I got traded from New York to St. Louis. It was a multi-person trade. Because, a Sankirtan devotee who's willing to go out every day, could be traded for like 7 pujaris and a cook or something like that. But that happened. But my point was, they was talking to a big audience, and I was thinking, oh my God, what are they going to think, Yeah, and then he was traded to something like traded. And so there's I noticed in myself a sensitivity, and I've noticed it over time from preaching to audiences that don't have the context of our culture, of being a little careful. And then, of course, the Western dress and the dhoti, people think it's a new argument. It's been going on forever. I mean, it started really when Bhaktidas got this idea. He was a great temple president, actually. He was in San Diego, and then he was in San Francisco. My second temple president. First one was Bhutatma. And then but before he even came to San Francisco, he had a Sankirtan traveling party out of San Diego, and he noticed they were getting kicked out of everywhere, wearing dhotis. So he sent them all to the Salvation Army, and they all got whatever they got, pants, shirts, and stuff like that. And then they didn't get kicked out. They were doing 3 times as big. And then Kṛṣṇa complained. He wrote a letter to Prabhupada saying that they're becoming hippies again. And Prabhupada said, then tell him to stop it. But then Bhaktidas wrote him and told him what was happening. And Prabhupada said, tell them to wear whatever they want. And he wrote that purport in that section of Prachaparudra? I think it's in there in the Madhya Lila. And then Prabhupada makes this point that whatever clothes you have to wear in order to preach, that's what Lord Caitanya did. And that was what Prachaparudra did too. He compared that to the devotees going on Sankirtan.
Yeah, we found we're doing shop to shop.
Yeah.
Because we've covered at least 25 to 30 shops since the summer. Towns with downtown areas. And we found if we're not dressed like this, we lose all credibility, especially with the Vietnamese nail salons.
Yep.
And there's some of the, they'll give you $200.
I know. I go to Story Road and down, what Story Road? It's not so far from the temple. It's about 20 minutes from ISV. The last time I went there was before I went to India. 2 times ago, before I went to India. And I was going around in a dhoti. The first person I saw, there's this older couple, Vietnamese couple. It's Vietnam town. Yeah. And they're driving past, and she looks at me and she goes like this. So I followed their car, and they got out of the car, and he was already ready to give me $50. Because I'm wearing this. So yeah, and then, I remember this devotee Panchatattva, he's still alive, and we were wearing wigs and nice clothes. We had nice clothes on, and wigs and ties and stuff like that at O'Hare Airport, because it's a very conservative place at the time. And then he'd always go out in a dhoti and shaved head, and it was always a competition to see who was, and also in Philadelphia. And, he was in the doctrine that, you got to wear a dhoti. Then we say, okay, let's see who does bigger. And so, it's always a struggle, but it comes down to what you just mentioned, is figure out what works best in the circumstance, right? Yinatena Pakarena.
There's some comments on my...
Oh, good.
Yes, Nityatrangini Mataji is saying, invent a way to get attention of those who go astray. Very powerful.
What is it, poetry night or something?
This is from one of the purports that we read.
Oh, really?
So this was a line from the purport.
So poetical, Prabhupada's writings.
Invent a way to get attention of those who go astray.
Fantastic.
Very powerful and inspiring. And then Marvi has many. Some say there are levels to devotion, how to weigh love and kindness. And then next one is, for example, exhaustion and overachieving.
What's the difference between those two? Or just saying you have to have a balance?
Yeah.
Wow.
And then next is medicine first, evidence later.
Evidence first and?
Medicine first, evidence later.
Oh.
This was during that conversation about Prabhupada's standards in intermingling of girls.
Medicine first, evidence later. I'll have to sleep on that.
And another person, this is just came. Maharaj, if I may ask, what do you mean by principles?
Oh yeah, Prabhupada was asked that question. The difference between principles and details. He said that requires intelligence. And I think that intelligence comes from sincerity. Because if you want to give mercy, and you also want to create, for instance, a community where people can give mercy and take it in, you have to base, you have to see what works best. Say, principles are something that works universally. That's one way I can understand a principle, and it's also portable. You can take it from one culture to the next, and it still has its effect. One reason principles are so glorified is because they work everywhere, generally. No, I can't say generally. They work everywhere. And then details have to do more with time, place, and circumstance. So the main principle is yena tena prakarena mana Krishna deveshaya. We're eternal servants of Krishna. That works everywhere. And also remembering Krishna. In any culture, it works. Now, what kind of prasadam you give exactly in any culture? South Indians really like South Indian food. And Chinese, I mean, I don't want to say stereotype, but I see a lot of noodles around there. So, you know, slight changes in detail, but the principle is there should be prasadam, and it should be offered to Krishna with love and devotion. There may be slight differences in the detail. It's an important question to ponder and to discuss amongst the devotees that you're working with to spread Krishna consciousness, to distill which things are most vital and important. And I think it should be done regularly in communities, and not just assume that we've got the formula right. It needs to be considered constantly and discussed. That's why Prabhupada had Ishtagoshtis, to have discussions to come to that.
I was just thinking, if we were to continue reading this chapter, Mahaprabhu, he immediately starts speaking about Bhagavatam, and he starts speaking about the holy name.
Mm-hmm.
Once this discussion between him and Prakashananda Saraswati begin, why is he not studying Vedanta? And he immediately starts talking about the holy name, and then he starts quoting the Bhagavatam as the basis of his practice. I was just thinking how this chapter really extracts the principles, which is somehow people need to take in the message of the Bhagavatam and the holy name, and by doing that, these cultural nuances, people can see, oh, if I want to take this seriously, these things are going to help me. It's not that. Because if they're just seen as an alienated, it's the means rather than a way. It's just seen as the goal rather than as the means, then people will maybe not become so interested because they just take it as something which is completely irrelevant to where they are. But if Krishna consciousness becomes relevant to them and it becomes, this is what I want to do, then in the course of studying Bhagavatam, the various cultural nuances which help facilitate a safe life in practicing Krishna consciousness, one will want to adopt that out of their own volition for wanting to chant properly and hear the Bhagavatam properly.
Yeah, and it had to do with principles of being clean, waking up early, not overeating, not undereating, and things like that. But there may be one man's food is another man's poison. And I think that was one of the ways that Prabhupada excelled. He excelled in all ways, but it was yet another way that he did, because he was careful to not reject people based on the details. When it came down to philosophical points, he was insistent, but he was careful. But then, yeah, if you come down to the essence of this chapter, as I like your point, as I like the points you're making about it, it's about the principle of giving mercy at all costs. And if you take that principle and you think in terms of that principle, how will we best expand people's opportunities to take to Krishna consciousness, then that can be applied internally also when it comes to details. Because if we're thinking when they come, okay, these details can help you, then you take to them based on the principle that they should advance in Krishna consciousness, we should give them mercy. It's when it comes to like the details start becoming the master. That's when you've gone too far that way and you have to bring it back. Because when you make the details the most important thing, that's human nature, because my details are better than your details. But what about the principle behind it? What if you leave somebody behind because of the details that you're insisting upon? And you know, the free mixing of men and women, that always has to be considered, because that's the binding force. Yan maitunadi gre medi sukam hitucham. You have to have some clarity about how to do that properly, not just anything goes. And I don't necessarily think people who say, you know, we should be back in the 1967 are saying that either, but whatever we say, we should be careful to consider it, what the principle is, and stay with that, then use the details as needed in order to help stimulate more growth. And that brings us to, yes, to the last question or point.
It reminds me, I think it was Gauranga Prabhu that was sharing so principles and details. So
Yes.
he put it as the mission remains the same, the method may change.
Mm.
So adjusting the method.
It's lucky there's these very smart people around the planet these days. I mean, it's amazing how the luminaries have joined the Krishna consciousness movement and grown up and been trained in Krishna consciousness and using their intelligence to write things and present things in very clear ways. It's fantastic. Well, I should head out, right?
Yes.
Speaking of a detail, or maybe it's a principle, I don't know. Thank you very much, everybody, for the evening, and look forward to seeing you in a couple hours.
And I have exciting news.
Oh, I get to go back?